Week 23. Overview. Restoration Colonies in the Age of Louis XIV. The years from 1660 to 1688 are known as the Restoration period in English history, which followed the upheaval of the English Civil War. Fed up with the Puritans' moralistic military rule, most of England welcomed Charles II back as king. These events in England had a big effect on colonial America. We've already seen how New England was settled by Puritans who sought to escape the reigns of James I and Charles I. When the Puritans gained the upper hand in England, it was the Royalists who fled to America, mostly populating Virginia. But once monarchy came back to England, religious dissenters once again joined the ranks of Puritans in New England. The English-speaking colonies swelled as a result. New France was expanding too, but not in population. French explorers claimed the entire Mississippi Valley, including all the lands drained by the Ohio, Missouri, and Red Rivers. This new territory, named Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV, stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes, from Appalachia to the Rocky Mountains. But this vast territory mostly went unsettled. To understand why, we must understand the King of France, Louis XIV, the most powerful man in the world at that time. In France, everything orbited Louis, absolute monarch of the most populous country of Europe. Louis wholeheartedly practiced the newest theory of government, absolutism. Kings had limited powers during the Middle Ages. They were dependent on their vassals, the noble lords, and they were checked to some degree by the power of the Church. After the Renaissance, feudalism was fading and the Church was divided. The modern nation-state had taken shape, that mighty power which the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes called Leviathan, a mortal god. The king was the visible face of the combined force of millions of united lives. In France, as Louis famously proclaimed, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. Louis's absolute control extended across the Atlantic to New France. There were just a few thousand settlers in New France in 1660. Louis sent over another 2,500 by 1672, all of them loyal Roman Catholics. Louis wanted New France to be a Catholic colony, not a haven for dissenters. There were plenty of dissenters in France, called Huguenots, and they had every reason to migrate. The French Protestants had enjoyed limited civil rights since the reign of Henry IV, who gave them the Edict of Nantes, which provided an enclave of religious freedom inside France for 67 years. All that ended in 1685, however, when Louis XIV revoked the edict and declared Protestantism illegal, displacing about 200,000 French Protestants. France's loss was England's gain. Many of these Huguenots moved to Britain or the British colonies in America. Louis ruled France absolutely. Charles II tried to rule Britain the same way. Charles's father had been Charles I, executed by Parliament in 1649. Prince Charles had taken refuge in France while the Puritans ran the English Commonwealth. Things looked bleak for a while, but Charles's fortunes improved when Oliver Cromwell died in 1658. Cromwell's son Richard took over England, but he was too weak to hold on to it. A military leader seized control of the government and persuaded Parliament to bring the prince back to England. The English enthusiastically welcomed him. They even dated the start of his reign back to his father's execution. Charles's approach to the political and social conditions in England was to turn back the clock in order to erase all traces of the 20-year rebellion. He re-established the primacy of the Church of England, with himself as its head, and revoked several important pieces of Puritan legislation. Charles's personal life could not have been more different from that of the Puritans he replaced. He was popularly known as the Merry Monarch. His wife, Queen Catherine, was barren, but he fathered at least 14 illegitimate children by various mistresses. Before he returned to England to ascend the throne, Charles II promised to pardon those who had executed his father and led the Commonwealth, and to allow freedom of worship. He broke both promises. He had many of those who had executed his father put to death, even hunting them down in the American colonies. Although he was officially head of the Church of England, Charles was privately a Roman Catholic sympathizer. He conspired with Louis XIV to try to bring England back to the Roman Catholic Church. King Charles II left quite a mark on the New World. He had no love for the people of Massachusetts for a number of reasons. They would not help his officials find his father's executioners. They resisted his navigation acts. They coined their own money. They would not make officials swear allegiance to the throne of England. They refused to allow the Church of England to be established in their colony. Charles took away their original charter rights. Massachusetts was turned into a crown colony and placed under a royal governor. The various settlements of Connecticut were united into one royal colony, too. New England was a tough nut to crack, but there were lots of unoccupied lands in America. Charles granted the territories that became North and South Carolina to 8 of his main supporters. These men had been loyal to him during his hard times. These proprietors, as they were called, attempted to set up a grand new feudal system, but it failed. Because North Carolina had very few natural resources to support growth, it grew very little. South Carolina, with its busy Charlestown harbor, grew rapidly. There was initially more freedom of worship in the Carolinas than in many other European settlements. People of many different faiths came to these new colonies. Huguenots from France, English Quakers, religious refugees from Germany and Ireland, and Jacobites from Scotland all found homes in the Carolinas. At times, Charles granted ownership of American lands they didn't yet rule. For instance, in 1663, his brother James, then the Duke of York, purchased a lapsed land title to a part of the American coastline. The Dutch had settled the area around the mouth of the Hudson River, and there were several Swedish settlements in what are now New Jersey and Delaware. The same territory had been conferred on the Earl of Stirling by Charles I. When he took the throne, Charles II gave his brother the right to colonize that land and rule the region between New England and Maryland. In 1664, James sent an expedition to New Amsterdam. This was a shrewd move. The Dutch West India Company had foolishly chosen not to place any garrison there. James's naval forces took control of New Netherlands without firing a shot. As a result, New Amsterdam became the personal property of James, a proprietary colony, not a royal one. James, Duke of York, promptly named it New York after himself. James then granted the land between the Hudson River and the Delaware River, which eventually became New Jersey, to 2 loyal royalists, Sir George Carteret and Lord Berkeley of Stratton. Along with New Netherland, the English now controlled the former New Sweden in what is now Delaware. Part of James's new territory was contested. It was claimed by Lord Baltimore of Maryland. As your students should find out next week, James leased Delaware to William Penn, who wanted his new colony of Pennsylvania to have easy access to the sea. Charles had his share of troubles during his reign. There was war with Holland after his brother James took over New Amsterdam. The Dutch sailed up the Thames River and attacked London, for the first and only time in its history. Most of the English fleet was docked at Chatham on the Thames, and the Dutch took them by surprise. Every ship was sunk except the English flagship, which was taken back to Holland as a prize. The English sunk 30 other ships themselves to keep them from being captured. That wasn't Charles's only trouble. During his reign, plague raged in London for a full year. After it finally subsided for a little, a terrible fire destroyed nearly a third of the city. 200,000 people were left homeless. Charles had no legitimate heir, so when he died in 1685, his brother James took the throne. His reign only lasted 3 years. We'll see what happened to him next week. It's useful to compare and contrast Charles II and Louis XIV. Louis was an absolute monarch. Charles was an absolutist wannabe. Though he ruled pretty much as he wished, and without any parliament at all for the last 4 years of his reign, Charles II was far from being the absolute monarch he may have aspired to be. Louis had no money troubles. His right to tax the people was just as absolute as any of his other powers. Not so Charles. In any state emergency or act of war, Charles had to call Parliament to ask for the necessary funds. There, Charles faced serious opposition and open criticism from the Whig party. Louis, by contrast, had no meaningful political opposition of any kind until the very end of his very long reign. Charles couldn't get rid of religious dissenters in England the way Louis did in France. Louis suppressed the Huguenots and revoked the Edict of Nantes. In England, there was little Charles could do about the Puritans, Independents, Quakers, and Baptists. These groups were too firmly entrenched and too numerous to suppress, and they continued to be a threat to his power throughout his reign. Thus we see how events in England and France shaped the New World. Each of the original American colonies had its own history and culture. The Puritans who settled New England shared the same ideals as the Puritans who cut off the head of King Charles I. They had very little in common with the Royalists who settled Virginia, or with those who moved to the Carolinas, colonies named after King Charles II. Given the Civil War between their families back in Britain, who could have imagined that one day Massachusetts men would stand shoulder to shoulder with men from South Carolina?